At issue this week, bad language. Decorum inside the House of Commons seems to be deteriorating.
The Conservative leader is wearing more makeup than I am today.
This week, the Deputy Prime Minister had to apologize for that comment, and the Leader of the Opposition can't seem to give up this criticism.
With so many empty stomachs, isn't it just a little bit wacko to be raising carbon taxes on farmers and food?
An election is still months away. Is this a preview of what's to come? I'm Rosemary Barton. Let's bring in At Issue to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all. I should tell Canadians who aren't privy to the bubble of Ottawa that we've now entered what we call silly season here, where for the next 5 weeks, MPs do not get to go back to their ridings for a week, and things generally kind of get a little kooky. But this is the first week of that. So I'm not sure where we're going to end up by the end of June. Althea, in a more serious note, what do you make of sort of the tenor of discourse and debate, given Chrystia Freeland's comments and Pierre Poilievre too?
Two things. One, I think the Liberals have decided to fight fire with fire, which I'm not sure is actually a good look for them. It's a long ways away from hope and hard work. But you see that, especially from the front bench, so Ms. Freeland, the Prime Minister, who are going out of their way to attack the Conservative leader, sometimes in personalized terms. The other thing that I think they're trying to do, and you've seen that this week, is tie Mr. Poilievre with a strategy that worked for them in 2019 and 2021, which is to paint the Conservative leader as a phony. 2019, we had that with Andrew Scheer, and he was a dual citizen and he never told anybody, and he was attacking other Liberals and the Governor General at the time, Michael Jean, for being a dual citizen. With Aaron O'Toole, they had it on vaccine mandates, on carbon pricing, on abortion, on guns. And you see that again starting to happen with the Conservative leader. So after Ms. Freeland apologized and withdrew her comments, she called him a phony. And they have started laying the groundwork again on the abortion question, a tried and true formula for the Liberals. But also you kind of get the inkling they might go there on carbon pricing. They went there today on homelessness, on support for our veterans. So I think those two things have given actually the Liberals a bit of a swing in their step. They seem much happier this week than they have previously from their week in their constituency and their slight rise in public opinion polls.
And Chantal, I mean, that's about like framing a leader, which obviously everyone wants to do, right, to try and paint a picture of someone. But those kinds of personalized attacks that are pretty petty, to be honest. Does that tend to work, or is that anything that Canadians would be listening to and think, oh, she's right?
She's right that he's wearing more makeup than she is. If she were he and he were she, and he had made that comment, that person who is a man saying that to a woman in the House of Commons would be in deep trouble today. So It's a stupid comment, but it's also a demeaning comment. And it didn't particularly work. Why should anyone stop doing whatever serious things they're doing to worry about the makeup on the face of the Leader of the Opposition or the Minister of Finance? Yes, it is silly season. Does anybody remember the elbowing episode when the Prime Minister stormed across the aisle some years ago at the same time in the session because he was angry that it was taking too long to get a vote underway? So we have seen unpleasant scenes in the past. I've rarely seen, and I covered Thomas Mulcair and Stephen Harper, and despite that, I've rarely seen two main leaders dislike each other so personally as Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre, and prone to show it openly. But to the framing of the opposition leader, the Liberals may want to look back in history to how the Conservatives were successful in framing Stéphane Dion when he was Liberal leader, and then Michael Ignatieff. But when they tried it with Justin Trudeau, it wasn't third time it works. It just didn't work, and I suspect that we are in that place in the cycle where what worked for Scheer, what worked for O'Toole, will not work for Poilievre.
Well, I would also argue, Andrew, that Scheer and O'Toole gave much more ammunition. Althea listed some of them to the Liberals, to their point. But talk to me about where you think this debate, like the level of debate tells us about where we're at.
Well, I mean, I can think of 100 things wrong with Canadian politics, and parliamentary decorum would be 101st. When politicians are attacking each other, they're at least closer to the truth than when they're praising themselves. And for all that's going on in Parliament, I can assure you a lot worse is happening on social media, and a lot worse will be happening during the campaign with the political advertising. Personal attacks are the bread and butter of politics, I'm afraid to say. We talk about, framing or defining, let's call it what it is, smearing. And that's what they do to each other. So that has become part of, as I say, the warp and woof of politics. There's no doubt that Pierre Poilievre has brought a particularly snippy, elbows up style to Canadian politics in general, and including his demeanor in Parliament. But the Liberals have a number of ways of showing contempt for Parliament procedurally. This is government that has, stonewalled committees, refused to let witnesses appear before them, refused to release documents that Parliament had demanded, one of the absolute undoubted prerogatives of Parliament. So between, procedural contempt and rhetorical sneers, I think I know which is worse for Parliament, except with the proviso that if Poilievre were in power, we'd probably be getting both. Each party comes into power vowing to clean up the mess left by the other guys, and then just takes it to a new level in terms of the demeaning of Parliament and of MPs' roles as the people's representatives. Yeah. And I'll just close with this point, that when you see people behaving as childishly as MPs do, it is usually a signal of their own lack of self-respect. If parliamentarians were a bigger deal, if to be a member of Parliament was a more important and dignified position, I suspect you'd see less of the kind of barracking and childish displays that you do. But when people are basically there to stand up and sit down when they're told, that's the behavior you tend to get.
Maybe. I mean, I think social media is a pretty big factor too. I mean, you made that point as well, Chantal. And then...
except when the Liberals invented what was called the Rat Pack, basically a group of MPs whose only goal in life was to make Parliament life impossible for the Mulroney government. There was no special social media, and still that is the antics that they got down to. So up to a point, if that puts a spring in the step of Liberal MPs, and Althea would see that, I wouldn't, I'm sitting in Montreal, then they're in pretty bad shape. Because there is nothing that you've watched. Do you think Chrystia Freeland and people around her are proud of her tonight? Does it enhance her reputation to look like that? It doesn't. So if that's where they're at, that this is the kind of stuff that makes them happy, God, that Kool-Aid must be really good.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be objectionable, you should at least be comprehensible. I mean, does anybody know what on earth that line was trying to get at, other than, I guess, that Poilievre was wearing makeup? But what did that have to do with anything, Yeah. I mean, the thing that's interesting about Poilievre in that regard is, talking about the Rat Pack, is it used to be that the leader stayed above the fray and you left the dirty work to your backbench MPs, and indeed you left the appeals to the extremes to your henchmen. Rather, the leader tried to take a moderate thing. With Poilievre, he's the guy who is keeping the People's Party people in the tent, and he's the guy who's still his own best attack dog. So he's pioneering a new style of leadership politics in that regard.
Last quick word to you, Althea.
Well, I think with the makeup comment, what she was trying to say is that, or paint the picture that he is a phony, that like the people outside Ottawa don't realize that, what he pretends he is, it may not be who he is. I think that's in that frame. I think the reason that the Liberals are going to such length is because, frankly, they don't have any money. They're not advertising, they're not spending any money on social media, pushing out any ads whatsoever, so they've decided to use their own politicians to deliver that message. I don't think that's a wise strategy. The MPs who had to spring in steps, I just want to be clear, it wasn't because of what Chrystia Freeland had done. And in fact, I think that might make them think twice, because they went to their ridings and they door knocked and they heard about Mr. Poilievre's wacko comment. And what they heard at the door, is what I'm told by several of them, is that that wasn't a prime ministerial look. And that some people, I mean, the polls tell us, they don't like Pierre Poilievre, they don't like Justin Trudeau. Right now, they're parking their ballots with the Conservatives because it's a none of the above, like a change option, and that's the only one they feel that is a valid one. So, this may not be a strategy that works out well for them in the long run. I just wanted to clarify that.
At At issue, Quebec separatism. The Parti Québécois has been gaining momentum in Quebec, and with it, the return of talk of independence for the province, plus this direct appeal to anglophone voters.
That's what independence is all about. Reclaiming the money that belongs to us and spending it where it really matters. It pays off to be independent.
So is the resurgence of the PQ real, and what could this mean for the rest of Canada? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Chantal, start us off here. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is not only because they're appealing to Anglo-Quebecers, but also because I'm not sure Canadians understand or know that the PQ has really has the momentum and is leading in the polls in Quebec.
And they probably don't know that we are 2 years at least away from an election. Sure. So the PQ is leading in the polls. The support for sovereignty is flat. There has not been an in tandem, so the PQ rise in the polls is driven by a vacuum on the other side of the aisle, not by a sudden rise in sovereigntist fervor. If there was a referendum tomorrow, the yes to independence would be defeated soundly. The current PQ leader thinks he can get himself elected to a majority government by committing to holding a referendum within the first 4 years of a PQ government. This is something that previous PQ governments could not get, except at the time of the Meech Lake Accord and Jacques Parizeau. But two things. The more Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, that's his name, talks about sovereignty, the more you see some regions starting to think again about the PQ. The Quebec City area, for instance, is now edging away from the Parti Québécois. The other thing to know about Quebec is the Quebec Liberals at this point do not have a leader. But recent polls have suggested very mildly that the return of this issue might actually be the kiss of life for the Quebec Liberals.
Interesting. Andrew, what are you thinking when you see all that and we hear Chantal?
Well, I agree with everything that Chantal said, that a lot can happen in the next 2 years that could confound the PQ's ambitions. I think that particular point about the Liberals, this being the kiss of life for the Liberals, and therefore returning to the polarization around that issue that has served both the PQ and the Liberals well over the years, is well taken. But let's not kid ourselves. If the PQ gets in spite of rather than because of their stance on the referendum, they will no doubt seize the opportunity, and certainly the opportunity to try to provoke confrontations, particularly over immigration. So we need to be thinking about that. I will note that this return to the fray follows several years in which the CAQ government has been launching one constitutional provocation after another and has had no serious response from any political leader in Ottawa. And I don't think that's coincidental, that we have to, I guess, keep relearning this lesson, that when Quebec nationalists push and nobody pushes back in Ottawa, when the leadership acts as if they don't believe the country has any moral foundation, they don't believe we have a right to exist or to exist as a coherent federation, then Quebecers are entitled to draw the appropriate conclusion of, if they don't care about it, why should we? So this attempt to sort of buy peace by just staying very, very quiet, I think we ought to have learned doesn't work. And we'll learn that lesson in spades as the PQ gets back in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's about not sticking putting a stick in through the cage, right? I mean, that's what some federal leaders believe works in this case, but I take your point. Althea.
Yeah, it's about not inflaming. It's not just feelings that are held by sovereigntists in Quebec, but by the general population. So if you inflame on Bill 21, as the Liberals have learned, if you inflame on Bill 96, which is a language bill, you're worried about your seat count come the next election. And if you're the Liberal Party, a significant chunk of your seats come from Quebec, so that's not a risk that you're willing to take. And you may also philosophically think that it's not worth creating a fight, giving the sovereigntist a front on which to attack you and attack the Federation. I think it's really interesting that the PQ is advertising in English. I think, frankly, it's positive because at least it makes Anglophones feel like they're in Quebec, that they're part of a Quebec project and not, on the sidelines and not included in the idea of what a Quebec nation or a country would look like. His argument about the financial incentive to separate, to me, make absolutely no sense. It's not even factually accurate, so I don't know why he is choosing that front. I think one legit criticism and concern shared by many Quebecers is the immigration question, is the idea that not just immigration in Quebec, and this is like, not having control over the borders with the asylum seekers coming in at Roxham Road, et cetera, but also immigration in the rest of Canada means that the weight of Francophone Quebecers has significantly dropped, or just even of Quebecers has dropped. There used to be, I think it's 27.5% of Francophones in the country in 1975, and now we're down at 22% or something of the sort. So continuously, every time we have a redistricting of the seats in the House of Commons, basically Quebec gets an additional seat grandfathered in because their population doesn't justify the weight that they have. And there are concerns that, the more immigrants there are in the province and outside the province, the less important Quebec becomes and the less important French becomes. So I think that is a legit criticism, and that is a criticism that federal leaders, come the next election, will absolutely have to deal with. And if the PQ is leading in the polls, I think one question will be who can be kept in Canada. And I think the leaders will be judged on that front.
Chantal.
I can see things that the Conservative Party and government under its current leader could do to make more Quebecers interested in the sovereignty issue. And on matters that have nothing to do with the Constitution or even immigration, but that have to do with climate change, with the future of Radio-Canada, with support for cultural industries. These are all issues upon which the consensus does cross the line between sovereigntists and the average Quebecers. And the moment where you say, whatever is going on in Parliament, whatever those policies are, we are not we're not going there. And that is probably the place, climate change. I know it doesn't sound sexy like talking about Bill 21 and Bill 96, but what's missing from the sovereigntist support is the younger generation of Quebecers.
Sure.
And what would drive them to look again at that option, or look for the first time at that option, would be issues like climate change, much more so than issues like immigration. Why? Because immigration, yes, is a big debate in Quebec, but so are labor shortages. And you can't square that circle just by saying Ottawa is sending too many immigrants to Canada. You need to figure out how you're going to get nurses and doctors and teachers to work in French to actually sustain the social fabric of the province.
Very quick last word, Andrew.
Well, just two things. One is you cannot discuss and solve questions or resolve questions around climate change or any other policy question by saying if we don't get our way, we blow the country up. We should never have indulged this fantasy that that was an appropriate way to resolve these sorts of questions. Secondly, just on the immigration thing, let's supposing we get 100 million people by the end of the 20th century, which is the 21st century, which is the great fear that's been raised about this. And let's supposing that Quebec's share of that falls to 18%, and let's supposing 2/3 of those are French speakers. So it's maybe the worst case scenario you can imagine. That still means you got 12 million French speakers in Quebec versus 8 million today. So this notion that Quebec's about to be drowned by this deluge of immigrants, or it's going to lose all its clout in the Federation. It had 29% of the population after World War II. It was much less important in the Federation, much less powerful than it is today with 22%. It's not a simple function of your share of the population.
Another would-be Conservative nominee is raising concerns over the nomination process. This is the third time issues have been raised with the process of choosing a candidate. Allegations have centered around the party playing favorites. Is this an issue for the Conservatives, or is the process just like this for all political parties? Let's bring back our panelists, Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. I don't know who wants to go first here. Althea, maybe you. I mean, to some extent, this is normal in that parties usually do have a favorite, and sometimes they put their thumb on the scale to get the candidate, the nominee that they want for the candidate. What's interesting here is that I don't think people are being really honest about what's happening in terms of who's putting the thumb on the scale. But give me your assessment of what you think is happening and whether it's a problem or not.
There were many similar allegations in the lead up to the 2015 election when the Liberals were trying to fill in their slate, and they had these star candidates that they wanted to save winnable ridings for. I think on the Conservative side, there has always been this feeling among the membership that the party is really run by the grassroots, and that there are rules that are set up and that the party will abide by the rules. And I think what is making a lot of waves is because the rules are not, or appear not to have been followed. And the party is not incentivized to tell people why this is going. And they also want to keep people selling memberships because they want those memberships to turn into donors and keep the party growing. So there's disenchantment on that side. Political parties are a key part of our democracy, but they are run as private clubs, despite the fact that they get $70 million in campaign election expenses refunded by the taxpayer, that they get about $25 million, and maybe a slightly little bit more in terms of tax credit support annually every year. And yet, they, if there's a privacy breach of our information that the party holds, they don't really need to tell anybody about it. So there are many problems with the way political parties organize their options, their contests. There are several options to fix it, but none of the political parties want to hand this over to Elections Canada or a third party or give any of their power away, and that's why I think it's unlikely that we see any reform.
Chantal, we've talked about nominations before. What's I think the difference here is these are people who want to be candidates that are being told, no, you're off the table, even though they had sold memberships, for instance.
They're not only being told that they're off the table, they're being told that they're disqualified for obscure reasons that are not provided to them, which is a shabby way to treat people who actually are your own supporters.
That's right.
And who want to join your team. But I totally believe that political leaders should be able to pick some or many members of their team that it's incumbent for a party that wants to run a government to present the best possible team that he or she can assemble. But I also believe that they should be accountable for wanting to do that by doing it up front. Jean Chrétien got from the Liberal membership the power to appoint candidates, and he did use it, and he didn't apologize for it. And you can say whatever you want about grassroots and local democracy, it still made more sense, and it was a cleaner process, than to make believe that you are actually doing the grassroots process and then finding ways to throw out the people that you don't want once they've worked hard to try to become candidates.
Yeah, and that's the part that's damaging for the Conservatives, Andrew. Both Althea and Chantal have identified it there. It's that they are a party of the grassroots. They give them a lot of attention during conventions to come up with policy, and then if these kinds of things happen, it sort of blows up in their face a little bit.
Well, I'm all for transparency, but I also don't actually believe that the leader should choose the MPs. I think the MPs should choose the leader. We were talking earlier about how insignificant MPs have become, how insignificant Parliament has become as the representative of the people, and not insignificant matter. Well, the founding point of that, the starting point of that, is the way in which we nominate, the way in which we choose the candidates. Either they are simply handpicked by the leader, as is the case, if I remember the numbers from the Samara Institute correctly, something like 40% of the time, whether because they're sitting MPs or because they're the favored child of the leadership, or if they're not directly appointed, they're surreptitiously appointed by, as you say, putting your thumb on the scales in various ways, holding leadership races without telling anybody until 2 days before, and then, uncertain schedules, uncertain places, et cetera. It's something out of a third world country. Or if it is an actual honest-to-God open race, then it's settled by busloads of people brought in at the last minute and mass dodgy sales. It's disgraceful through and through. But the biggest single thing of it is whoever does survive that process cannot stand as a candidate for the party unless he gets the leader's signature on his nomination papers. So from the get-go, they are beholden, utterly beholden, to the party leadership, and they remain so because even if they win election, if they want to run again, they still have to get the leader's signature or the leader's delegate. So if we want to start fixing Parliament and making Parliament a relevant place again, we got to start looking at the nomination races. And if that weren't urgent before, the stuff that we've learned coming out of the foreign interference inquiry, it makes it absolutely imperative because now it's not just local thugs fixing races, it's foreign thugs. And to hear the Prime Minister testify that, I didn't want to intervene in the Don Valley North nomination because he'd been chosen by the local riding, and who am I to interfere in the sacred process of democracy? No, you don't kick a guy out because he's suspected of being too close to a foreign dictatorship, but you do kick people out, as you said, for any number of other much more trivial reasons because you posted something on Facebook 12 years ago.
Okay, I should have known that would get Andrew going, but sometimes I forget.
So Andrew would
Very
not want to
quickly,
be
yeah.
picked by a leader, but he's not sure that he would want to be picked by local members unless that Elections Canada oversees the entire process.
I absolutely think that the nomination races should come under the Elections Canada laws. This pretense that political parties are private clubs that only wish to be left alone by the state. They are seekers after state power. They want coercive power over the rest of us. We absolutely have a right to inquire into and to supervise how they run their internal elections.
All right, Chantal's just trying to get you going there. Okay.
He's not going to be picked by any leader.
He doesn't
after
want
this.
to be anyway. Okay, thank you all very much. That's that issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for watching.